Blood dripped from Amara Johnson's designer handbag onto the pristine airport floor. The flight attendant's laughter echoed as she pointed at the fake Louis Vuitton. Nobody noticed the tall figure approaching, her husband, Terrell Johnson, founder of Skyline Airways and the airline CEO, watching everything unfold. Before we dive into this incredible story of discrimination and justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of their skin color, hit that like button and subscribe right now. The next part of this story will show you exactly why standing up against everyday racism matters more than you might think. 3 days earlier, Dr. Amara Johnson sat in her office at Atlanta Memorial Hospital, staring at the email that had just arrived in her inbox. The prestigious Boston Medical Society was inviting her to be their keynote speaker at next month's International Neurosurgery Conference. Her groundbreaking research on traumatic brain injuries had finally caught the attention of the medical elite. Amara leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of pride. The journey to this point had been anything but easy. After graduating at the top of her class from Harvard Medical School, she had faced an uphill battle at every turn. Despite saving countless lives with her surgical skills, she still encountered patients who questioned her abilities and colleagues who attributed her success to diversity initiatives, rather than brilliance. She reached for her phone to call the one person who had believed in her from the beginning, her husband, Terrell. "They want me to keynote the Boston conference," she said when he answered. "That's incredible, babe. I always told you they'd recognize your brilliance eventually," Terrell responded, his deep voice filled with genuine pride. Terrell Johnson wasn't just any supportive spouse. As the founder and CEO of Skyline Airways, a rapidly growing airline challenging industry giants, he understood what it meant to excel in spaces not designed for people like them. He had built his company from the ground up after being passed over for promotion at 3 different airlines despite his Harvard Business School credentials. "I'm not sure if I should accept," Amara admitted, twirling a pen between her fingers. "Remember what happened at the Chicago Symposium last year?" Terrell's sigh carried through the phone. He remembered all too well. Amara had been mistaken for support staff 3 separate times, despite wearing her credentials prominently. One surgeon had even handed her his empty coffee cup, assuming she was there to clean up. "I know exactly what you're thinking," Terrell said. "But this is different. You're not just attending, you're the keynote. This is your moment to shine." Amara glanced at the framed photo on her desk, her grandmother in a nurse's aide uniform, taken in 1978. She had been the one to inspire Amara's medical dreams, while simultaneously warning her about a system not built for people like us. "Grandma Ruby would tell me to go and show them what a black woman can do," Amara said, more to herself than to Terrell. "She absolutely would," Terrell agreed. "And I have a meeting in Boston that same week. Perfect timing." What Amara didn't know was that Terrell had been working with Boston Memorial Hospital for months. He planned to surprise her with a $10 million donation to establish a neurological research center in her name. It would be his anniversary gift to her, 10 years of marriage, $10 million to further the medical research she had dedicated her life to. That evening, as Amara packed her suitcase in their Buckhead mansion, she carefully folded her presentation notes and selected her professional wardrobe. For a moment, she hesitated before the closet safe, then decisively entered the combination. Inside was the Louis Vuitton Capucines bag Terrell had given her for their anniversary 2 years ago, genuine, expensive, and something she rarely used for fear of appearing flashy at the hospital. "Take it," Terrell encouraged, appearing in the doorway of their walk-in closet. "You've earned the right to carry something beautiful." Amara smiled and placed the bag in her suitcase. She had earned it, after all. 16-hour surgeries, research published in leading medical journals, and a reputation for taking the cases other neurosurgeons deemed hopeless, her credentials were impeccable. As they said goodbye in their circular driveway the next morning, neither of them could have anticipated how that designer bag would become the center of a national conversation about race, respect, and corporate accountability. Terrell kissed her goodbye, his 6'3" frame bending down to embrace her petite figure. "I'll see you in Boston in 2 days," he promised. "Go show them what brilliance looks like." Amara nodded, climbing into the waiting car. She had chosen to fly National Airways rather than her husband's Skyline Airways, maintaining the professional boundaries she'd always insisted upon. She never used her husband's position for special treatment, a principle that would soon be severely tested. Amara arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport 3 hours before her scheduled departure to Boston. Dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit with her credentials tucked into the pocket, she exuded the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. Her Louis Vuitton Capucine's bag contained not just her personal items, but also USB drives with her research data and presentation slides she had meticulously prepared for the conference. The trouble began at the National Airways check-in counter. Despite the first-class ticket in her hand, the agent squinted at her reservation suspiciously. "Is this your ticket, ma'am?" he asked, emphasizing the last word in a way that made it sound less like a courtesy and more like a question. "Yes, it is," Amara replied evenly, having encountered this particular brand of skepticism before. The agent examined her ID card with unusual scrutiny before reluctantly issuing her boarding pass. "Enjoy your flight," he said, without making eye contact. Amara proceeded to security, where despite her TSA pre-check status, she was pulled aside for random additional screening. The female officer patting her down seemed to take extra time examining her hair. "Is there a problem?" Amara asked calmly. "Just procedure, ma'am," the officer replied, though Amara noticed the white businessman ahead of her had passed through with barely a glance. These were the small indignities Amara had learned to navigate throughout her career, the subtle questioning of her presence in first-class lounges, the surprised looks when she introduced herself as Dr. Johnson, the way security personnel seemed to find her inherently suspicious. She had developed a thick skin out of necessity, saving her energy for battles that mattered. After clearing security, Amara made her way to Gate C-18, where flight attendants in crisp National Airways uniforms were preparing for boarding. One flight attendant in particular, her name tag read Megan Patterson, glanced at Amara and then whispered something to her colleague. Both women looked Amara up and down before sharing a smirk. Amara took a seat near the gate, opened her laptop, and began reviewing her presentation slides. She was deep in concentration when the announcement for priority boarding came over the loudspeaker. As she gathered her belongings and approached the priority line, Megan stepped directly in front of her. "Excuse me," Megan said with exaggerated politeness. "This line is for first class and priority members only. General boarding will begin shortly." Amara maintained her composure. "I'm in first class," she said, extending her boarding pass. Megan examined the boarding pass with obvious skepticism. "You're Dr. Johnson?" she asked, emphasizing the title as if it were a fabrication. "Yes, I am. I'm speaking at the Boston Medical Conference tomorrow," Amara replied, feeling the familiar need to validate her presence. "Of course you are," Megan said with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. She reluctantly scanned the boarding pass and gestured for Amara to proceed down the jetway. As Amara moved forward, she heard Megan whisper to another attendant, probably using her husband's miles. Amara took a deep breath and continued walking. This was nothing new, just another day as a black professional woman in America. Once on board, Amara stowed her carry-on in the overhead compartment and carefully placed her Louis Vuitton bag under the seat in front of her. She had just settled in when a white businessman in his 50s took the seat beside her, accidentally spilling his coffee on her bag as he sat down. "Oh, sorry about that," he said dismissively, not making any move to help clean up the spill. Amara quickly retrieved her bag, noticing that coffee had splashed onto the expensive leather. As she tried to blot it with a tissue, Megan passed by and stopped. "Having trouble with your bag?" she asked, her voice carrying enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Someone spilled coffee on it," Amara explained, still dabbing at the stain. Megan leaned closer, examining the bag with an exaggerated squint. "These replicas never hold up well to stains," she said loudly. "The fake leather absorbs everything." Amara looked up, momentarily stunned. "Excuse me? This isn't a replica." Megan gave a theatrical wink to the flight attendant behind her. "Of course it isn't, honey. And I'm sure you got it at the real Louis Vuitton store too." The implication was clear. Megan didn't believe someone who looked like Amara could afford the real thing. Blood rushed to Amara's face as several nearby passengers turned to watch the interaction. "This was a gift from my husband," Amara said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "And it is authentic." Megan's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Sweetie, I've been flying to Paris for 15 years. I know the difference between real designer goods and the knockoffs they sell on the street. The stitching on yours is all wrong." By now, other passengers were openly staring. Some looked uncomfortable, but others seemed entertained by the confrontation. The businessman beside Amara even snickered. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," Amara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Are you threatening me?" Megan asked, suddenly shifting to a defensive tone. "I'm just trying to do my job, and if you're going to be disruptive, we can have you removed before takeoff." The situation was escalating rapidly. Coffee continued to drip from Amara's bag onto the pristine airplane floor, creating a small puddle that somehow made the confrontation even more humiliating. "I'm not being disruptive," Amara said. "I simply asked to speak with your supervisor because your comments are unprofessional and inappropriate." "Everyone here saw you getting aggressive," Megan countered, gesturing to the surrounding passengers as if seeking allies. A few nodded in agreement, while others looked away uncomfortably. It was happening again, being painted as the angry black woman for simply standing up for herself. Amara felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the weight of having to calculate every word and expression to avoid reinforcing stereotypes. "I'm not being aggressive," Amara said carefully. "I'm asking to be treated with basic respect." "We treat all our passengers with respect," Megan replied, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "But we also have rules about counterfeit goods and passenger behavior." As the confrontation continued, neither woman noticed the tall, distinguished man who had boarded the plane and was now standing quietly in the aisle, observing the scene with increasing concern. Terrell Johnson had arrived at the airport earlier than planned and, seeing Amara's flight hadn't departed, had decided to surprise her with the news that they could fly to Boston together on his private jet instead. What he was witnessing now made his blood boil, but years in corporate America had taught him to channel his anger strategically. Rather than immediately intervening, he pulled out his phone and began recording. Terrell Johnson stood in the aisle of the National Airways first-class cabin, his 6'3" frame commanding attention even before anyone recognized who he was. He continued recording the confrontation between his wife and the flight attendant, his expression revealing nothing of the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. He watched as Megan Patterson leaned over Amara, finger pointed at the Louis Vuitton bag. The very bag he had personally purchased at the flagship store on Fifth Avenue 2 years ago. "I know fakes when I see them," Megan was saying, her voice deliberately loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "And people who can't afford first class usually can't afford real designer goods either." The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Terrell noticed how some passengers snickered while others looked away uncomfortably. Not a single person spoke up in Amara's defense. This wasn't the first time Terrell had witnessed discrimination. As he built Skyline Airways from nothing into a billion-dollar company, he had encountered countless boardrooms where he was the only black face, countless situations where his authority was questioned despite his credentials. Early in his career, Terrell had learned that explosive anger, however justified, only reinforced stereotypes and gave ammunition to those who wished to dismiss him. He had developed a different approach. Strategic, measured, and ultimately more effective. He would use that approach now. Instead of immediately announcing his presence, Terrell continued recording while mentally noting every witness, every detail. He spotted a National Airways senior cabin crew member at the front of the plane, deliberately looking away from the confrontation. He noted the faces of passengers who were filming the incident themselves. Each observation was ammunition for what would come next. As he recorded, memories flashed through his mind, Amara coming home in tears after a patient had requested a real doctor, the real estate agent who had tried to steer them away from certain neighborhoods despite their multi-million-dollar budget, the valet who had handed Terrell the keys to someone else's cheaper car, assuming the luxury vehicle couldn't belong to him. Death by 1,000 cuts, that's what they called these daily indignities. But sometimes, a single cut went deep enough to demand a response. Terrell finally stepped forward, stopping his recording and pocketing his phone. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to commanding rooms much larger than an airplane cabin. "Excuse me," he said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Megan turned, irritation flashing across her face at the interruption. She didn't recognize him. "Sir, I'm handling a situation with this passenger. Please return to your seat," she said dismissively. "I believe the passenger you're referring to is my wife," Terrell said, his tone measured but firm. Megan's expression shifted slightly, but she maintained her position. "Well, sir, your wife is causing a disruption by what?" Terrell interrupted, his voice remaining calm. "By objecting to being publicly humiliated. By asserting that her personal property is authentic when you claimed otherwise." Amara looked up at her husband, surprise giving way to relief and then to concern. She hadn't expected him here, on this flight, and the public confrontation was exactly the kind of scene they both typically worked to avoid. "Terrell," she said quietly. "It's fine." It's not fine," Terrell replied, his eyes still locked on Megan. "And I think we all know it's not fine." By now, the other flight attendants had noticed the confrontation. One of them, recognition dawning on her face, tugged urgently at her colleague's sleeve. "Megan," she whispered. "Do you know who that is?" Megan glanced irritably at her coworker. "I don't care if he's her husband. Rules apply to everyone." "That's Terrell Johnson," the other attendant hissed. "The CEO of Skyline Airways." The color drained from Megan's face as the name registered. Terrell Johnson wasn't just any airline CEO, he was the founder of the fastest-growing carrier in the industry, a regular on business magazine covers, and one of the most powerful black executives in America. "Mr. Johnson," she stammered, her tone transforming from condescension to panic in an instant. "I had no idea, we certainly didn't what?" Terrell asked, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that made everyone in hearing distance sit up straighter. "Didn't expect that a black woman in first class might be married to someone like me. Didn't think there would be consequences to treating a passenger this way." The entire cabin had gone silent. Even the businessman who had been smirking earlier was now staring intently at his phone, avoiding eye contact. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," Terrell continued. "Not the flight attendant in charge of this cabin, I want the gate manager brought onto this aircraft immediately." "Yes, sir," another flight attendant said, rushing toward the front of the plane to use the intercom. Megan remained frozen in place, her earlier confidence evaporated. "Mr. Johnson, there's been a misunderstanding. I observed the interaction for several minutes before intervening," Terrell cut in. "There's no misunderstanding. You saw a black woman with an expensive bag and automatically assumed it was counterfeit. You chose to humiliate her publicly rather than offer assistance when another passenger spilled coffee on her belongings." Whispers rippled through the cabin as passengers began to realize the gravity of the situation. Some were already on their phones, no doubt sharing on social media that Terrell Johnson himself was confronting National Airways staff. Within minutes, a harried-looking gate manager hurried onto the plane, his face pale as he spotted Terrell Johnson standing in the aisle. "Mr. Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Keith Dawson, National Airways gate manager. I understand there's been an incident." "An incident," Terrell repeated, not taking the offered hand. Is that what you call it when your staff publicly humiliates a first-class passenger based on racial assumptions? Keith's eyes darted nervously between Terrell, Amara, and Megan. Sir, I assure you that National Airways has a strict non-discrimination policy and... I'd like to see that policy, Terrell interrupted. In writing. Now. As Keith fumbled for a response, Terrell turned to Amara. Grab your things, babe. We're not flying National Airways today. Amara stood, gathering her coffee-stained bag with as much dignity as she could muster. The businessman beside her suddenly seemed eager to help, jumping up to retrieve her carry-on from the overhead bin. Mr. Johnson, Keith said desperately. Please allow us to make this right. We can offer complimentary upgrades, additional miles. This isn't about upgrades or miles, Terrell said, his voice carrying throughout the cabin. This is about basic human dignity. Something National Airways clearly needs to work on. As they prepared to leave, an elderly black woman seated a few rows back caught Amara's eye and gave her a small, approving nod. It was a look Amara recognized, solidarity from someone who had likely weathered similar storms for decades. The couple made their way toward the exit, followed by the increasingly desperate gate manager. Behind them, passengers whispered and pointed, many already typing furiously on their phones. By the time they reached the jetway, Terrell knew that what had happened here wouldn't stay here. It was about to become much bigger than one flight attendant's mistake. The jetway felt impossibly long as Amara and Terrell walked back into the terminal, followed closely by Keith Dawson, the National Airways gate manager. His face had taken on a sheen of nervous sweat as he continued offering various forms of compensation. Mr. and Dr. Johnson, please consider allowing us to book you into our premium cabin on the next flight. We can offer additional sky miles, complimentary lounge access for a year, and, Terrell stopped abruptly, turning to face the manager. Keith, I appreciate that you're trying to do damage control, but you're missing the point. This isn't about perks or upgrades. Of course, sir. I completely understand, Keith responded, though his expression suggested he didn't understand at all. Do you? Terrell asked. Then I'd like to see National Airways' written policy on discrimination and how staff are trained to implement it. Keith shifted uncomfortably. I'd have to contact our corporate office to obtain those documents, Mr. Johnson. Then I suggest you do that, Terrell replied. Email them to me directly. He handed Keith a business card with his contact information. As they continued walking, Amara remained unusually quiet. Terrell knew his wife well enough to recognize she was processing not just the humiliation she'd experienced, but also the complex emotions around his intervention. Amara had always fought her own battles, it was one of the qualities he most admired about her. They had nearly reached the main terminal when an older black woman approached them, the same woman who had nodded to Amara on the plane. Excuse me, she said, her voice carrying the gentle cadence of the South. I just wanted to say thank you. Amara looked at her questioningly. I've been flying for 40 years, the woman continued. And nothing ever changes unless someone with power makes it change. What you two did back there, standing up like that, it matters. Thank you, Amara said softly. It shouldn't take someone with my husband's position to be treated with basic respect, she added, a hint of the frustration she was feeling seeping into her voice. No, it shouldn't, the woman agreed. But that's the world we live in, isn't it? I've got stories that would curl your hair, child. Been flying since 1976, and I could write a book about the things I've seen and experienced. As she spoke, two more passengers from the flight approached, both black women in business attire. Dr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, one of them said. I'm Jasmine Williams, and this is my colleague Taylor Bennett. We just wanted to say we've had similar experiences with National Airways. Multiple times, Taylor added. But without someone like you there, Mr. Johnson, we just had to swallow our pride and take it. Terrell felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. The responsibility that came with his position, his visibility. He pulled out his phone. "If you're comfortable sharing, I'd like to get your contact information," he said. "What happened today isn't going to be swept under the rug like these incidents usually are." As the small group exchanged information, Keith hovered nearby, clearly alarmed by the impromptu gathering. Other travelers began to recognize Terrell, and whispers spread through the terminal. "We should go," Amara said quietly to her husband. "This is becoming a scene." Terrell nodded and thanked the women for their support. "This isn't over," he promised them. The couple made their way to the Skyline Airways private lounge, where they would have privacy before boarding Terrell's company jet. Once inside the quiet, elegantly appointed space, Amara finally let her composure slip. "I hate that you had to see that," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I hate that it happened at all." Terrell crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I hate that it happened too. But I'm glad I was there." "I could have handled it," Amara said, a flash of her usual independence returning. "I know you could have," Terrell assured her. "You've been handling situations like this your whole career. But you shouldn't have to, Amara. None of us should." She sank into one of the plush chairs, carefully placing her stained Louis Vuitton bag on the table. Coffee had seeped into the cream-colored leather, leaving an ugly brown mark across the iconic monogram pattern. "Look at this," she said, gesturing to the bag. "All of this over a purse that I didn't even want to bring. I knew it would draw attention." "This isn't about the purse," Terrell said firmly. "That's just an excuse. This is about people seeing a successful black woman and immediately looking for ways to put her in her place." Amara looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What does it say about me that after everything I've accomplished, Harvard Medical School, my research, all the lives I've saved, I still question whether I should carry a designer bag because of how people might react?" Terrell sat beside her, his usual confidence momentarily giving way to vulnerability. "I ask myself similar questions every day. Every time I walk into a boardroom. Every time I have to prove myself to people with half my credentials and twice my opportunity." His phone buzzed insistently. National Airways PR team was already calling. He silenced it without answering. Instead, he pulled up the video he had recorded on the plane and showed it to Amara. "This needs to be seen," he said quietly. "Not just for us, but for everyone who's ever been in that position without the power to fight back." Amara watched the video, seeing her own humiliation from an outside perspective. She watched Megan's dismissive gestures, heard the condescension in her voice, saw the amused expressions of nearby passengers. "Post it," she said finally. "This isn't just about me anymore." Do you think what Amara and Terrell experienced is still common in America today? Comment 1. If you believe discrimination like this happens frequently in everyday situations. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar while traveling? Hit the like button if you think more companies need to be held accountable for how their employees treat customers of color. And subscribe if you want to see what happens next in this incredible true story of justice and accountability. Will National Airways try to sweep this under the rug, or will Terrell's influence force real change? The media storm that's about to hit both companies will surprise you. By the time Amara and Terrell's private jet touched down in Boston, the video had already gone viral. Terrell had posted it to his personal social media accounts with a simple caption, "This is what a black woman with a Harvard medical degree experiences flying first class on National Airways." #respect Amara. As they deplaned, both their phones were buzzing constantly with notifications. Terrell's executive assistant had called 17 times. National Airways stock had dropped 15% in a single afternoon, wiping billions from their market capitalization. The hashtag Respect Amara was trending nationwide. CNN is requesting an interview, Amara said, scrolling through her messages as they settled into the waiting car. So are MSNBC, Good Morning America, and every major network. Terrell nodded, unsurprised. Their CEO has called me 4 times. I haven't answered. The driver navigated through Boston traffic toward their hotel as Amara and Terrell tried to process the scale of what was unfolding. What had begun as a personal humiliation was rapidly becoming a national conversation about race, privilege, and corporate accountability. Megan Patterson released a statement, Terrell said, reading from his phone. "Listen to this, I deeply regret how my actions were perceived. I never intended any disrespect to Dr. Johnson and am devastated that my words came across as discriminatory. That's not who I am or what I believe." Amara shook her head. "That non-apology is almost worse than saying nothing. National Airways put her on administrative leave pending investigation," Terrell added. "Classic corporate move, isolate the individual, protect the system." When they arrived at the Four Seasons, the hotel staff had been briefed on the situation. The manager personally escorted them to their suite through a private entrance, avoiding the reporters already gathering in the lobby. "Dr. Johnson," the manager said as they entered the suite, "the medical conference organizers called. They wanted to confirm you'll still be delivering tomorrow's keynote." Amara hesitated. In the chaos, she had almost forgotten the reason she'd come to Boston in the first place. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'll be there." After the manager left, Amara checked her professional email. The conference organizing committee had sent a message expressing concerns about the distraction her personal situation might cause. "They're worried about my situation overshadowing their precious conference," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "As if I orchestrated this for attention." Terrell came to stand behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "What do you want to do about all this?" "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Before Amara could answer, her phone rang. It was Dr. William Foster, her department chair at Atlanta Memorial. "I should take this," she said, accepting the call. "William, hello." "Amara," Dr. Foster began, his tone cautious. "I've seen the video. Everyone has. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Just preparing for tomorrow's keynote." "About that," Foster said. "Some of the board members are concerned about the hospital being drawn into this controversy. They're suggesting it might be better if you keep a low profile for a while." Amara felt her chest tighten. "Are you asking me not to deliver the keynote?" "Not at all," Foster backpedaled quickly. "Just suggesting that perhaps focusing on the medicine rather than becoming an activist might be better for your career long-term." The implication was clear. "Don't rock the boat, don't become that doctor who fought with the airline, just do your job and be grateful for your position." "I'll take that under advisement," Amara said coolly before ending the call. She turned to Terrell, who had heard enough to understand. "They want me to pretend nothing happened. To be a good, quiet doctor who doesn't make waves." "What do you want?" Terrell asked again. Before Amara could answer, the hotel room phone rang. The front desk informed them that Jackson Williams, CEO of National Airways, was in the lobby requesting to meet with them. "Tell him we'll meet tomorrow," Terrell said. "We need time to consult with our legal team." As he hung up, his personal phone rang again. This time, it was Skyline Airways Chief Operating Officer, Maya Richardson. "Terrell," Maya said without preamble when he answered. "The board is calling an emergency meeting. They're concerned about potential business repercussions if this escalates into a full-scale conflict with National Airways." "Tell them I'll join virtually in an hour," Terrell replied. When he ended the call, he found Amara staring out the window at the Boston skyline, her reflection in the glass revealing the conflict on her face. "I just wanted to deliver my presentation," she said quietly. "To share my research and help advance the field. I never wanted to become the face of whatever this is becoming." Terrell joined her at the window. "But maybe this is just as important as your research. Maybe this is exactly where we're meant to be right now." Amara's phone chimed with a news alert. She opened it to find Megan Patterson giving a tearful interview on a national news program. "I've always prided myself on treating all passengers equally," Megan was saying, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "This has been taken completely out of context. I would never discriminate against anyone. They're already trying to rewrite the narrative," Terrell observed. "Make her the victim instead of the perpetrator." The next morning brought fresh challenges. Amara woke to discover that her speaking slot at the conference had been shortened from 45 minutes to 20, without anyone consulting her. "They're hoping I'll withdraw completely," she said as she dressed for the conference. "That would solve everyone's problem, wouldn't it? The quiet black doctor who knows her place and doesn't cause trouble." Terrell, who had been on calls with his executive team since dawn, looked up from his laptop. "Is that what you want to do?" "No," Amara said, a new resolve in her voice. "I'm going to deliver my presentation. But maybe not the one they're expecting." As she gathered her materials, her phone pinged with a message from Dr. Lisa Chen, a former colleague from her residency days. "Just saw what happened," Lisa had written. "Not surprised. Remember when that patient demanded an American doctor and they gave him Jenkins instead of you? Same story, different day. Don't let them silence you." The message hit Amara hard. She remembered that incident all too well, being passed over for a complex procedure because a white patient had objected to her presence, despite her superior qualifications. Dr. Jenkins, a less experienced white surgeon, had taken the case instead. The hospital administration had framed it as respecting patient preferences. "I've been swallowing these indignities my entire career," Amara said, almost to herself. "Keeping my head down, working twice as hard, never complaining. For what? So I can be humiliated over a handbag at 40? As they prepared to leave for the conference, Terrell's phone rang again. This time, it was Martin Hayes, one of National Airways board members, and a former Harvard Business School classmate. "Terrell," Martin said, his voice grave. "This situation is spiraling. Jackson is digging in his heels, insisting this was an isolated incident and not reflective of company culture." "We both know that's not true," Terrell replied. "You're right," Martin admitted. "I've been reviewing our internal complaint records. There's a pattern here that can't be ignored. Some of us on the board are pushing for more comprehensive action, but we're meeting resistance." "What are you suggesting?" Terrell asked. "Meet with us, not Jackson, but a group of board members who want real change. This could be an opportunity to transform not just National Airways, but industry standards across the board." As Terrell considered the proposal, Amara received another notification. A prominent black journalist had published an investigative piece detailing dozens of discrimination complaints against National Airways over the past 5 years. "Listen to this," she told Terrell, reading from the article. "Former National Airways employees describe a culture where racial profiling was tacitly encouraged under the guise of security and service standards. Black passengers in premium cabins were routinely subjected to additional scrutiny and skepticism not applied to their white counterparts." The piece went on to quote anonymous employees who claimed they had been instructed to verify premium tickets more carefully for certain passengers and to watch for inconsistencies that might suggest fraud. "They trained their staff to do exactly what Megan did to me," Amara said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Terrell nodded grimly. "This was never about one flight attendant making a mistake. This is systemic." As they prepared to leave for the conference, both were aware that whatever happened next would have implications far beyond their personal experience. The question was no longer whether they would speak out, but how they would use this unexpected platform to drive meaningful change. The medical conference venue was bustling with activity when Amara and Terrell arrived. Doctors in formal attire mingled in the grand lobby of the Boston Convention Center, many already wearing their name badges and carrying program booklets. Under normal circumstances, Amara would have felt a surge of professional pride just being there. Today, she felt like an outsider in her own field. Security personnel escorted them through a side entrance to avoid the small cluster of reporters who had gathered outside. Word had spread that the viral airline incident doctor would be speaking. Dr. Robert Thompson, the conference chair, met them in a small green room. His discomfort was evident as he shifted his weight from foot to foot, avoiding direct eye contact with Amara. "Dr. Johnson," he began, his voice overly formal. "In light of recent events, we've had to make some adjustments to the program. Your keynote has been shortened to 20 minutes, Amara finished for him. "I saw the updated schedule." Thompson cleared his throat. "Yes, well, we have many speakers to accommodate, and the committee felt uncomfortable with the attention I'm receiving," Amara said directly. "Let's not pretend this is about scheduling." Thompson's face flushed. "Dr. Johnson, this is a medical conference, not a platform for other issues. We're concerned that your personal situation might overshadow the scientific content of the event." Terrell, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped forward. "Her personal situation, as you call it, is directly relevant to medicine. If you don't see how bias affects healthcare delivery and medical careers, then perhaps this conference needs more disruption, not less." Thompson looked alarmed. "Mr. Johnson, we deeply respect Dr. Johnson's research. That's why she was invited in the first place. But surely you understand our position." 20 minutes is fine," Amara interjected, placing a calming hand on Terrell's arm. "I can say what needs to be said in 20 minutes. Thompson seemed relieved, clearly expecting more resistance. "Excellent. You're scheduled to speak at 11:30. If you need anything before then, actually, I do need something," Amara said. "I'd like to review my presentation slides on the main system. I've made some adjustments." Thompson hesitated before nodding. "Of course. I'll have our AV team assist you." After he left, Terrell turned to Amara. "What adjustments are you making?" A small smile played at the corner of Amara's mouth. "I'm reframing the conversation. My research on traumatic brain injuries has always been about invisible damage, the kind that doesn't show up on standard scans but still impacts function. There are parallels there to what we're experiencing." Terrell understood immediately. The invisible trauma of everyday discrimination. "Exactly," Amara confirmed. "If they want to give me a platform, even a shortened one, I'm going to use it." As Amara prepared to upload her revised presentation, Dr. Catherine Maxwell, a senior neurosurgeon Amara had long admired, entered the green room. "Amara," she said warmly, embracing her. "I've been looking for you. That video, I had no idea things like that still happened in this day and age." Amara returned the embrace but couldn't help noting the privilege in Catherine's statement. The luxury of being surprised by discrimination rather than expecting it. "It happens all the time, Catherine," she said gently. "Every day, in ways both subtle and overt." Catherine looked genuinely distressed. "Several of us on the senior committee argued against shortening your time slot. We were outvoted." "By whom?" Terrell asked. Catherine hesitated. "I shouldn't say, but Dr. Harrison led the charge. He suggested that your becoming an activist might undermine your scientific credibility." Dr. James Harrison was a neurosurgery department chair at a prestigious West Coast university, and someone who had consistently questioned Amara's research methodology at previous conferences. "That sounds like Harrison," Amara said. "He's been trying to discredit my work for years." "He's threatened by you," Catherine replied. "Your latest findings directly contradict his treatment protocol. This is just his latest attempt to minimize your influence." The conversation was interrupted by a text message from Maya, Terrell's COO. The Skyline Airways board had convened their emergency meeting, and Terrell needed to join virtually. "I have to take this," he told Amara. "Will you be okay?" Amara nodded. "More than okay. Go handle your board. I'll handle mine." As Terrell stepped out to join his company's meeting, Amara was left with Catherine. "What are you going to do?" Catherine asked. "I'm going to remind everyone why I was invited to speak in the first place," Amara replied, her resolve strengthening. "And maybe help them see connections they've been missing." Meanwhile, Terrell joined the Skyline Airways emergency board meeting from a private room nearby. The tension was palpable even through the video conference. "Terrell," said Howard Friedman, the board chairman. "We're concerned about potential business repercussions. National Airways is suggesting this could be construed as anti-competitive behavior if you continue to pursue this publicly." "Anti-competitive?" Terrell repeated incredulously. "Holding them accountable for discrimination is not anti-competitive. It's basic human decency." "We understand your personal connection to this situation," another board member added. "But as CEO, you have fiduciary responsibilities to consider." Terrell leaned closer to the camera. "Let me be clear. This isn't just personal. This is about industry standards and corporate culture. If we don't stand for something beyond profit, what are we building here?" Maya spoke up in his defense. "Our employees are overwhelmingly supportive of Terrell's stance. Internal messages show 92% approval for his actions." This information seemed to shift the room's energy slightly. Furthermore, Maya continued, "We've received inquiries from 3 major corporate clients about switching their business travel contracts from National Airways to Skyline. They're citing our ethical stance as a key factor." The board members exchanged glances. "There's something else you should know," Terrell added. "I've been contacted by executives from several other airlines. They're interested in forming an industry coalition to establish new standards for diversity training and accountability." Howard looked surprised. "Which airlines?" "I can't name them yet," Terrell replied. "But they represent over 40% of domestic market share. This could be an opportunity for Skyline to lead on an issue that matters, and to distinguish ourselves in the market." The conversation shifted from damage control to strategic positioning. By the time the meeting concluded, Terrell had secured the board's tentative support for his approach, provided it was framed as an industry-wide improvement initiative rather than a campaign against National Airways specifically. As Terrell ended the call, a notification appeared on his phone. National Airways had just announced a new Respect for All initiative, promising enhanced diversity training for all customer-facing staff. The timing made it obvious this was a direct response to the viral video. Terrell texted Amara, "National Airways just launched a hasty diversity initiative. Pure PR move." Amara, who was reviewing her presentation slides one final time before taking the stage, replied simply, "Too little, too late." It was nearly time for her keynote. As she walked toward the main auditorium, she passed groups of conference attendees talking in hushed tones. Some offered encouraging smiles. Others averted their gaze. She recognized the pattern, the same division she'd seen her entire career between allies and those who preferred not to get involved in political issues. At the door to the auditorium, she paused, taking a deep breath. What had begun as a professional humiliation had evolved into something much larger. Her modified presentation would not just share her medical research but contextualize it within broader social realities. It was a risk, but one she was finally ready to take. Dr. Thompson's introduction was brief and notably lacking in the usual warm personal anecdotes that preceded keynote addresses. Our next speaker is Dr. Amara Johnson from Atlanta Memorial Hospital. She will discuss her research on non-conventional indicators of traumatic brain injury. Please welcome Dr. Johnson. The applause was polite but reserved as Amara took the stage. She gazed out at the sea of faces. Predominantly white, predominantly male, with small islands of diversity scattered throughout the auditorium. At the back, she spotted Terrell slipping in, giving her a subtle thumbs up of encouragement. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I'm here to talk about damage that doesn't show up on standard scans, invisible trauma that affects function in profound ways." But before I delve into my research, I think we need to acknowledge a different kind of invisible trauma that's affecting our field and our society. A ripple of unease moved through the audience. This was not the standard opening for a medical presentation. Amara was about to step fully into the intersection of her professional expertise and her lived experience, a space she had carefully avoided for most of her career. There was no turning back now. The massive screen behind Amara displayed her first slide, a comparative brain scan showing subtle damage patterns that standard imaging protocols often missed. It was familiar territory for her, the culmination of years of meticulous research. "What you're looking at," she began, her voice clear and authoritative, "is evidence of trauma that conventional systems fail to detect. Left unaddressed, this invisible damage creates cascading effects throughout the entire system." She clicked to the next slide, which showed statistical data on missed diagnoses. 47% of patients with these markers are initially misdiagnosed. They're told their symptoms are exaggerated, psychosomatic, or simply not credible. This dismissal compounds their trauma and delays critical intervention. Amara paused, making deliberate eye contact with different sections of the audience. "But I'm not just here to talk about brain trauma today. I'm here to draw a parallel between what happens in our medical practice and what happens in our society, how we systematically fail to recognize certain types of damage because our standard instruments aren't calibrated to detect them." The auditorium had gone completely silent. Dr. Harrison, seated in the front row, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Yesterday, I experienced what millions of Black Americans experience daily. The trauma of having my presence questioned, my credentials doubted, and my humanity diminished in a public space." Amara proceeded to describe the airport incident clinically, as if presenting a case study. No emotional language, just facts, the flight attendant's behavior, the public humiliation, the assumptions made about her based solely on her appearance. Now, some would say this incident was isolated, one employee's mistake. Others might suggest I'm overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. But as scientists, we know better than to dismiss patterns simply because they make us uncomfortable. She clicked to a new slide, this one showing research not on brain injuries but on racial disparities in pain management. Studies consistently show that Black patients receive less pain medication than white patients with identical conditions and pain scores. One study found that 40% of first- and second-year medical students believe Black patients have thicker skin or less sensitive nerve endings than white patients, biological falsehoods that persist in our modern medical education. Murmurs rippled through the audience. This was not the presentation they had expected, yet Amara was grounding it firmly in scientific research. The same bias that leads a flight attendant to assume a Black woman couldn't possibly own an authentic designer bag leads some of us in this room to dismiss Black patients' pain reports. The same systemic blindness that fails to detect subtle brain trauma fails to recognize the cumulative impact of daily discrimination. She clicked to another slide showing a quote from her own research paper, "What we choose to measure determines what we're capable of seeing. In both medicine and life, what we choose to see determines who gets dignity, who receives appropriate care, and whose humanity is fully recognized," Amara continued. "The instruments we use, whether MRI machines or company policies, reflect our priorities and our blind spots." Dr. Harrison raised his hand, clearly attempting to interrupt or redirect. Amara acknowledged him with a professional nod. "Dr. Johnson, while this social commentary is certainly interesting, perhaps we could return to the scientific content we were promised?" Amara smiled slightly. "Dr. Harrison, I am delivering scientific content. I'm demonstrating how cognitive bias affects assessment, diagnosis, and treatment, not just in my specific research area, but throughout our entire profession." She clicked to her next slide, which showed correlations between perceived physician empathy and patient outcomes. When patients feel seen and respected, their clinical outcomes improve measurably. When healthcare providers recognize and address their own biases, diagnostic accuracy increases. This isn't political, it's evidence-based medicine. The tension in the room was palpable, but something else was emerging too, a sense of recognition among many attendees, particularly women and people of color, who were nodding in agreement. My research on invisible brain trauma has always been about seeing what others miss, Amara continued. About developing more sensitive instruments to detect damage that conventional systems overlook. Today, I'm asking us to apply that same scientific rigor to examining the systems we've built, in medicine and beyond. For the remainder of her 20 minutes, Amara seamlessly wove together her groundbreaking neurological research with broader implications for medical practice. She presented data showing how bias affected everything from triage decisions to surgical referrals, backing each point with peer-reviewed studies. When we dismiss evidence because it doesn't fit our existing paradigm, we're not practicing good medicine, she concluded. And when we silence conversations about bias because they make us uncomfortable, we're not practicing good science. As she finished, the auditorium erupted, not in uniform applause, but in a polarized response. Some attendees immediately rose to their feet, giving her a standing ovation. Others remained seated, arms folded, expressions ranging from thoughtful to openly hostile. Dr. Thompson hurried to the stage, clearly anxious to move on to the next speaker. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for that comprehensive presentation. We'll now take a 15-minute break before our next session. As Amara stepped away from the podium, several younger doctors approached her, many with tears in their eyes. Thank you for saying what many of us have experienced but never had the platform to express, a young black resident told her. Others shared their own stories of being mistaken for support staff, having their diagnoses questioned, or being passed over for opportunities despite superior qualifications. Meanwhile, across town, Terrell was engaged in a different kind of crucial conversation. He had received an unexpected call from Martin Hayes, the National Airways board member who had reached out earlier. Terrell, I'm with several other board members at the Ritz-Carlton. We'd like to meet with you, without Jackson Williams' knowledge. I'm listening, Terrell replied. We've reviewed internal complaints data going back 5 years, Martin explained. The pattern is undeniable. What happened to your wife wasn't an isolated incident. It's symptomatic of cultural issues that Jackson has repeatedly refused to address. What are you suggesting? Terrell asked, though he already suspected where this was heading. We believe it's time for leadership change at National Airways. Several major shareholders agree. But we need more than just the incident with your wife, we need someone with industry credibility to help articulate a path forward. Terrell considered the implications. This meeting would need to remain confidential for now. Absolutely, Martin agreed. Can you meet us in an hour? After confirming the details, Terrell returned to the convention center to find Amara surrounded by admirers and critics alike. Her presentation had clearly struck a nerve. How did it go? He asked when they finally had a moment alone. Mixed reactions, Amara admitted. But I said what needed to be said. Terrell shared the details of the call from National Airways board members. This could be an opportunity to create real change, not just a performative diversity initiative. Amara nodded thoughtfully. Do you trust them? Not completely, Terrell admitted. But Martin Hayes has been pushing for diversity initiatives at National for years. Jackson Williams has been the roadblock. As they discussed next steps, Amara's phone buzzed with a notification. Her speech had been recorded by several attendees and clips were already circulating on social media. The hashtag #WhatWeChooseToSee was trending alongside #RespectAmara. National Airways' hastily announced diversity initiative was being widely criticized as insufficient in comparison to the structural changes Amara had advocated for in her speech. They're trying to control the narrative, Terrell observed. But they're a step behind. So what's our next move? Amara asked. Terrell showed her the address for his upcoming meeting. We changed the game entirely. The private dining room at the Ritz-Carlton exuded old-world power, dark wood paneling, heavy curtains, and a table large enough to decide the fate of industries. Terrell and Amara arrived precisely on time, both dressed in the armor of their respective professions, he in a bespoke charcoal suit, she in a tailored navy dress with her medical credentials still visible on the lanyard around her neck. Martin Hayes greeted them at the door, accompanied by 3 other National Airways board members. "Thank you for coming," he said, shaking their hands firmly. "We appreciate your discretion." Before they could be seated, however, the door opened again. Jackson Williams, National Airways CEO, walked in with his general counsel beside him. "Well," Williams said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I see the meeting started without me." Martin looked genuinely surprised. "Jackson, this was an attempt to go behind my back." Williams finished for him. "Yes, I gathered that. Fortunately, my assistant is quite loyal." The tension in the room crystallized instantly. Whatever coup Martin had been orchestrating had just been intercepted. "Since we're all here," Williams continued smoothly, "why don't we make this official? Dr. and Mr. Johnson, I believe we have matters to discuss." Terrell, ever the strategic thinker, simply nodded. "Indeed we do." They arranged themselves around the table, National Airways contingent on one side, Terrell and Amara on the other, with Martin Hayes uncomfortably positioned between the factions. "Let me start by offering my sincere apologies for your experience, Dr. Johnson," Williams began, his tone practiced and polished. "What happened was completely unacceptable and does not reflect National Airways values." "And yet it happened," Amara replied evenly. "Not just to me, but to countless others who lacked the platform to make their experiences visible." Williams maintained his corporate smile. "One employee's actions don't define our entire organization. Megan Patterson has been terminated, and we've announced comprehensive diversity training for all customer-facing staff." "Training isn't enough," Terrell interjected. "This isn't about one employee. It's about systemic issues that your company has ignored for years." Williams' expression hardened slightly. "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Johnson. One that could be construed as defamatory if made publicly." The threat was thinly veiled, but Terrell remained unruffled. "It's not an allegation when there's evidence to support it." He opened a folder and slid several documents across the table, printouts of internal complaints filed by National Airways employees and customers over the past 5 years, all related to racial discrimination. "Where did you get these?" Williams demanded, his composure slipping. Martin Hayes cleared his throat. "They're from our internal system, Jackson. As board members, we have access to this data you've consistently downplayed in quarterly reviews." Williams shot Martin a look of pure venom before regaining his professional demeanor. "These complaints represent a tiny fraction of our millions of customer interactions. Every company faces similar challenges." "Perhaps," Amara acknowledged. "But not every company responds to them the same way. Your pattern has been to minimize, individualize, and avoid structural changes." The general counsel leaned forward. "Dr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, let's be practical here. National Airways is prepared to offer a substantial settlement, along with a public apology, to put this unfortunate incident behind us." "We're not interested in a settlement," Amara replied firmly. "Everyone has a number," the lawyer persisted. "This isn't about money," Terrell said. "It's about dignity and accountability." He pulled out another document, this one prepared by his team at Skyline Airways. "What we're interested in is real change. This proposal outlines structural reforms that would address the root causes of what happened to my wife and many others." Williams barely glanced at the document. "We've already announced our diversity initiative." "Your initiative focuses on sensitivity training," Terrell countered. "Our proposal goes further: independent oversight of discrimination complaints, transparent reporting of incidents, revised hiring practices for leadership positions, and clear consequences for policy violations at all levels." "These demands are unreasonable," Williams said dismissively. You're asking us to admit systemic problems that don't exist and implement oversight that no other airline has. Someone has to be first, Terrell replied simply. The meeting continued in this vein for nearly an hour, proposals offered and rejected, data presented and dismissed, the fundamental gulf between their perspectives seemingly unbridgeable. Finally, Williams pushed his chair back from the table. Let me be blunt, Johnson. You're leveraging a single unfortunate incident to demand changes that would cost millions to implement and admit liabilities that could expose us to class action lawsuits. It's not happening. And let me be equally blunt, Terrell responded. This single unfortunate incident happened to involve the wife of someone with the resources and platform to make it visible. But it represents thousands of similar experiences that happen every day to people without those advantages. That's their word against ours, Williams said coldly. Amara, who had been observing the corporate chess match with increasing frustration, finally spoke up. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about human beings, your customers, as adversaries whose experiences you can dismiss if they can't prove them to your satisfaction. Williams turned to her with barely concealed condescension. Dr. Johnson, I understand this is personal for you, but business decisions can't be based on emotions. This isn't about emotions, Amara fired back. It's about ethics, integrity, and whether your company's actions align with the values you claim to uphold. As a physician, I'm held accountable when I make mistakes. Patients can sue me, review boards can sanction me, and my hospital can terminate me. Why should corporations be held to lower standards than individuals? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Williams stood up. I think we've reached an impasse. Our legal team will contact you with our final offer. I suggest you consider it carefully before taking any further public actions that might be construed as anti-competitive. As National Airways contingent prepared to leave, Martin Hayes remained seated. I'll be staying, he told Williams. We still have board matters to discuss. Outside the Ritz-Carlton, Terrell and Amara found themselves walking through an unexpected gauntlet. Word of the meeting had somehow leaked, and protesters from both sides had gathered, some supporting the Johnsons with #RespectAmara signs, others accusing them of playing the race card for publicity or financial gain. This has become bigger than us, Amara observed as their driver navigated through the crowd. Terrell nodded, checking his phone. And it's about to get bigger. I've just received messages from 3 of our largest investors expressing concerns about my focus on this distraction. Distraction, Amara repeated bitterly. That's what they called my speech today too. As if human dignity is a side issue rather than a central concern. When they returned to their hotel, the situation escalated further. Their suite had been broken into, nothing stolen, but Amara's remaining research materials for her next presentation had been damaged, papers scattered across the floor. Hotel security was apologetic but had no explanation for how someone had bypassed the electronic locks. The implied message was clear, powerful interests wanted this to go away, and they were willing to escalate beyond public relations tactics. As they surveyed the damage, Terrell made a decision. This ends now, he said, his voice quiet but resolved. Not with a settlement or a press release, but with something they can't ignore or buy their way out of. What are you thinking? Amara asked, recognizing the expression that had preceded some of her husband's most ambitious business moves. I'm thinking it's time to leverage what we've built, Terrell replied. Not just Skyline Airways, but the relationships and influence we've developed across the industry. He began making calls, first to Maya, his COO, then to executives at other airlines, corporate travel managers, industry association leaders, and influential shareholders. Each conversation built upon the previous one, pieces falling into place for a strategy that was rapidly taking shape. I'm calling a press conference for tomorrow morning, he told Amara when he finally set down his phone. And I need you there with me. What are you planning? She asked. Terrell's expression was both resolute and calculating. Something that will force not just National Airways, but the entire industry to recognize that this moment isn't going away. The question is, are you ready for what comes next? Because once we do this, there's no going back to our comfortable lives and careers as they were before. Amara thought about her hospital administrators urging her to focus on medicine, rather than activism, about colleagues who had distanced themselves since the video went viral, about the young doctors who had approached her with tears in their eyes after her speech. "I've been ready my whole life," she said finally. "I just didn't know it until now." The Boston Convention Center's press room was filled beyond capacity by 8:30 the following morning. News that Terrell Johnson, the rising star CEO of Skyline Airways, had called an emergency press conference had sent speculation running wild throughout the business world. National Airways stock had already dropped another 7% in pre-market trading, purely on rumors about what might be announced. Amara sat in the front row, watching her husband prepare backstage. She hadn't been privy to all the details of what he planned to announce. He had been on calls until past midnight, and they had decided it was better for her genuine reaction to be captured live. At precisely 9 o'clock, Terrell stepped to the podium, flanked by Maya Richardson, his COO, and attorneys from Skyline's legal team. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as he adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," he began, his deep voice projecting confidence. "3 days ago, my wife, Dr. Amara Johnson, experienced what millions of Americans experience daily, the humiliation of being judged not by her character or credentials, but by the color of her skin." He paused, letting the words land before continuing. "What began as a personal incident has revealed systemic issues that extend far beyond one flight attendant or one airline. Today, I'm here not to focus on blame, but on transformation." The room was completely silent now, reporters leaning forward in anticipation. Effective immediately, Skyline Airways is terminating all code-sharing agreements and industry cooperation with National Airways until comprehensive anti-discrimination reforms are implemented and verified by independent auditors. Gasps rippled through the audience. Code-sharing was the lifeblood of airline partnerships, allowing carriers to sell seats on each other's flights. Terminating these agreements was unprecedented. But Terrell wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm proud to announce the formation of the Dignity in Travel Coalition, an alliance of 15 airlines representing over 43% of domestic market share, committed to establishing new industry standards for diversity, equity, and inclusion." Cameras swiveled to capture the reaction of other executives who had entered from the side of the stage, CEOs and representatives from regional and national carriers, standing together in a powerful visual statement. This coalition will create an independent oversight board to review discrimination complaints across member airlines, establish transparent reporting mechanisms, and implement accountability measures that ensure incidents like what happened to Dr. Johnson become learning opportunities rather than public relations crises. Terrell gestured toward a distinguished black woman who stepped forward from the group. "To lead this effort, we've appointed Dr. Vivian Carter, former federal civil rights attorney and transportation policy expert, as the coalition's first executive director. Dr. Carter will have full autonomy and resources to create meaningful change." Amara watched from the audience, emotions welling up as she realized the scope of what Terrell had orchestrated. This wasn't just about their experience, it was about leveraging that experience to create structural change. "Some will call this an overreaction to a single incident," Terrell continued. "Others will view it as a calculated business move. The truth is simpler, it's about aligning our industry's practices with the values we claim to uphold." He looked directly at Amara as he delivered his closing remarks. "My wife often quotes a line from her research: 'What we choose to measure determines what we're capable of seeing.' Today, we're choosing to measure ourselves not just by profit margins and on-time percentages, but by how we uphold human dignity in every interaction, for every passenger." The press conference transitioned to questions, with reporters clamoring for details about the coalition's specific commitments, the financial implications for participating airlines, and whether National Airways had been invited to join. National Airways, like any carrier committed to these principles, Is welcome to join the coalition once they've demonstrated genuine commitment to change, Terrell explained. This isn't about excluding anyone. It's about establishing a new baseline for what customers should expect and what employees should be empowered to deliver. As the questions continued, Amara's phone buzzed with a notification. National Airways Board of Directors had called an emergency meeting. Within hours, news broke that Jackson Williams had been removed as CEO, with Martin Hayes appointed as interim chief executive. In his first statement, Hayes announced that National Airways would formally request to join the Dignity in Travel Coalition and would implement all recommended reforms, without reservation or delay. In the days that followed, the ripple effects continued to spread. Megan Patterson, the flight attendant who had humiliated Amara, reached out through her attorney requesting a private meeting. Initially reluctant, Amara eventually agreed. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Megan said when they met at a neutral location, her voice strained with genuine emotion. "But I want you to know I'm doing the work to understand how I could have behaved that way. It wasn't just a bad day or poor judgment. It was biases I didn't even recognize I had." Amara listened without interrupting, noting that Megan's apology contained no excuses or attempts to minimize what had happened, a rare quality in such situations. "I can't speak for others who've experienced what I did," Amara said finally. "But I appreciate your willingness to acknowledge the deeper issues at play. That's where healing begins, both personal and institutional." 6 months later, the landscape had changed dramatically. The Dignity in Travel Coalition had expanded to include 23 airlines worldwide. National Airways, under Martin Hayes' leadership, had transformed from an industry laggard to a model for institutional change, with transparent reporting of discrimination complaints and measurable improvements in customer satisfaction across demographic groups. Amara had established a mentorship program for young Black medical students, helping them navigate both the clinical challenges and the social dynamics of medical education. The Louis Vuitton bag that had sparked the original confrontation had been donated to a museum exhibition on everyday discrimination at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. On a crisp autumn morning, Amara found herself at Boston's Logan Airport once again. This time boarding a National Airways flight for a medical conference. The airline had been rebranded with a new logo and slogan, "Everyone belongs in the sky." As she settled into her first-class seat, she noticed the flight crew, diverse in every sense, greeting passengers with genuine warmth. The flight attendant who scanned her boarding pass commented knowledgeably on Amara's upcoming keynote address, having recognized her name. Midway through boarding, Amara observed a subtle interaction that confirmed how much had changed. A young Black woman was questioned about her first-class seat assignment by a newer flight attendant. Before Amara could rise to intervene, another crew member quietly redirected her colleague, ensuring the passenger was treated with appropriate respect. Small victories, Amara thought. But small victories were how systemic change began. With individual incidents, individual decisions, individual courage multiplied across organizations and industries. Her phone chimed with a message from Terrell, changing the world one flight at a time. "Proud of you, proud of us." Amara smiled as she typed her response, "It's not perfect yet. But it's progress." And progress, she had learned, was worth celebrating, even as they continued the work of making what had once seemed impossible become simply the new standard. What do you think about Amara and Terrell's approach to fighting discrimination? Did they do the right thing by using their positions of influence to create industry-wide change? Leave a comment below with your thoughts on how we can all contribute to making spaces more inclusive and respectful for everyone. If you believe in standing up against everyday discrimination, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and transformation. Share this with someone who needs to hear that change is possible when we refuse to accept the status quo. Thank you for watching, and remember, what we choose to see determines what we're capable of changing. This powerful story reminds us that meaningful change often begins with a single moment of injustice that someone refuses to accept. Dr. Amara Johnson and Terrell Johnson show us that when we harness our positions of influence, whether personal or professional, We can transform individual humiliation into systemic improvement. True accountability requires more than apologies or diversity training, it demands structural change and independent oversight. The Johnsons demonstrate that addressing discrimination isn't about vengeance but about creating systems where dignity is the standard for everyone. The story also illustrates how discrimination operates on multiple levels, from obvious public humiliation to subtle professional undermining. Each character's journey reveals that confronting bias requires both courage and strategy. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative teaches us that standing up against injustice isn't just for those directly affected. Real progress happens when people with privilege and power choose to see what others experience and use their position to drive change rather than maintain comfortable silence. What will you do the next time you witness discrimination? Will you be a bystander or an ally? Remember, what we choose to see determines what we're capable of changing. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination like Amara did? Share your story in the comments below, your voice matters in this important conversation. If you believe businesses should be held accountable for how they treat people of color, hit that like button to show your support. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose injustice and celebrate those fighting for dignity and respect. Don't keep this message to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what many people experience daily. Thank you for joining us in this journey toward a more just world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve.